All right, I was like, good evening. What is Chos Baruch Hashem to be back to Maseches Berachos. I do hope that everyone did have a chance to chazer a little bit over the weekend. The nice part about our redefined structure a little bit is we're only doing 2 blot a week, and at 2 blot a week, we Baruch Hashem have the opportunity to use Friday, Shabbos, Sunday to really acquire it. So hopefully you had time to do it. If not, okay, find time in Eretz Hashem this week, hopefully to review a little bit. So we left off today's daf. Tonight's Amud is Daled Amud Aleph 4a, and we left off Baruch Hashem Keban Shalom Udashachar. We left off 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. So let's just reorient ourselves a little bit. So remember, we're speaking about the fact that David HaMelech got up at midnight. Right? Again, we saw different accounts over here. Did David HaMelech get up at midnight? Maybe he was just dozing like the beginning of the day to begin with. But by midnight, he's up. So the Gemara says, remember, then ultimately, again, from midnight up until dawn, he was learning what happened at dawn. Once dawn came, again, time for business. What was the business? Amrulo, Adonenu HaMelech, Amcha Yisrael Tzrichen Parnasa. The first thing, the advisors came in, they say, David, Klal Yisrael needs Parnasa. So what's the problem? Let them do commerce with each other. They said a small amount doesn't satisfy the lion. The idea is they can't generate enough business internally to satisfy the capital needs of the people. Furthermore, a pit can never be filled up from its own dirt. Now, what does this mean? If you ever dig a pit and you try to refill it with the very same dirt, the pit doesn't fill up in the same way. So in other words, in order for a society to exist, as wonderful as it is for people to generate business from within, there has to be some type of capital expansion as well. I will point out how fascinating it is that the first thing that David HaMelech starts like the day with is business, is money. Im ein kemach in Torah. If there's not parnasa, if there's not a livelihood, spiritual matters, they don't even come into calculation. It's very important that in general in life that we recognize that it's only once a person's material needs are met that they have the ability to really focus on spirituality. If a person doesn't have their material needs met, and when I say material needs, I'm not talking about like a super yacht. I mean just like, again, a person is able to pay their bills, a person is able to keep their head above financial water. Without that, it's very difficult for a person to really be attentive to their spiritual needs. So therefore, the first order of business in David HaMelech's kingdom was Parnasa. So Amar Lahem, David says, Luchu upashti yedechem bigdud. Go out, maybe we need to conquer more territory. So let's wage battle. Let's conquer more territory. If we conquer more territory, either again through taxes or through things that we'll conquer, again that'll be an infusion into the economy. Miyad yotzem b'Achitofel. They went and they asked Achitofel. We'll see what Achitofel is in just a moment. V'nim lachem b'Sanhedrin. They would ask for permission from Sanhedrin. V'sholim b'Urim v'Tumim. And they would ask to Urim v'Tumim. We'll say, you can't just go out to war. In the Jewish kingdom, as much as the king is the final authority, but before going out for battle, there's a series of processes that he has to go through. He has to consult the Sanhedrin, the high courts. He has to consult the Urim v'Tumim. The Urim v'Tumim also refers to the Kohen Gadol, wore a choshen, wore a breastplate. That breastplate had 12 stones that had the names of the Shvatim on it. Behind the breastplate, there was like a fabric fold. Inside of that was the 72-letter name of God that was inserted into the fold. That essentially acted as the spiritual battery for the Choshen. What would then happen is the king or the Kohen Gadol would ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu a question, and the Ribono Shel Olam would respond through the Choshen. How would he respond through the Choshen? The letters would light up, indicating a divine response. An incredible and overwhelming thing. They literally were able to talk directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Ribono Shel Olam responded through the Choshen. So you have to consult the Sanhedrin, you have to consult God before going out to battle. So the Gemara says as follows. Amar Rav Yosef Mikra, what's the pasuk? T'chsiv v'acharei Achitofel b'nei ben Yoyada v'Avyasar v'sar tzva lemelech Yoav. So the Gemara says, who are all these people? Achitofel zeyois. Achitofel was David's primary advisor. V'chinu Omer ve'itzas Achitofel sheyasu yamim ahim kasher yishal ish b'dvar alakim. Top of Dalet 4a. So Rabbi says, first person we have Achitofel, king's advisor. Next, Benaya ben Yehoyada. Who is Benaya ben Yehoyada? Zeh Sanhedrin. He was the head of the high court. The Sanhedrin was the 72-member court that resided inside of Lishkas Hagazis, the chamber of hewn stone, which was a chamber inside of the Beis Hamikdash. The head of that court was a man by the name of Benayah ben Yehoyada. Vev Yasar. Who's Ev Yasar? Kohen Gadol. Elu Urim V'Tumim. So he was the Kohen Gadol. So this was, so if you notice, it's fascinating. David HaMelech's kitchen cabinet. His kitchen cabinet was Achitofel, his advisor. Achitofel, his advisor. Benayah ben Yehoyada, head of the Sanhedrin. Ev Yasar, the Kohen Gadol. V'cheinu Omer Benayah ben Yehoyada ala kresi ve'ala plesi. Benayah ben Yehoyada, ultimately again, ala kresi, what is Valamanikra supposed to say? Kresi uplesi is another name for the Urim V'Tumim. So why do they call it kresi uplesi? Valamanikra shma kresi uplesi. Kresi shekarsim divrehem. I will say kresi because literally again, when you ask the Urim V'Tumim a question, now again I will say, the Urim V'Tumim is another name for the Choshen, together with the piece of paper, with the 72-letter name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That together was called the Urim V'Tumim. Another name for it was Kresi Uplesi. That's a descriptive term. Kresi, because when you ask the question to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he answered through the Urim V'Tumim, it was decisive. Shekarsim Divrayim. Plesi Shemuflam B'Divrayim. It was a wondrous thing. It was an incredible thing. I will say, we hear about these things, and what's incredible is Halavai Miras Hashem will be able to. I don't know if we'll see it, but Lamais will be able to know that it's happening again in the third Beis Hamikdash, which is really such an incredible thing to contemplate. Rabbi say again, who else was part of the kitchen cabinet? Head of the military. Rabbi say it's such a fascinating thing. So if you think about it, for a Jewish king, remember again, Judaism believes in a theocracy, which is a king who has absolute power, but whose power is bound by the laws of the Torah. But even the king, even in a Jewish theocracy, at the end of the day, there's a system of checks and balances. So the king has a kitchen cabinet, he has an advisor. Ultimately, again, he has a head of a Sanhedrin, he has a Kohen Gadol, and he has the head of the military. Those are the people that the king consults with specifically before going out to war. Micro, what's the pasuk? So now we're going back for just a second. Remember, how do we get into all this? We get into all this because the Gemara said that David HaMelech woke up at midnight. Remember again, how did he wake up at midnight? Good, because he's right, the harp. Right? The northern wind would blow through the strings of the harp, and there would be like his alarm, literally his alarm clock. So now the Gemara goes back to that. Micro, what's the pasuk that supports that? Ura kivodi, ura hanevel v'kinuar ira shachar. So here the pasuk makes reference to ura hanevel v'kinuar. So again, the harp awakens me. Okay. Rabbi Zera Amar, Moshe li olam haviyah. Supposed to say, if you remember again, we go back for just a second, the Gemara made it sound like before that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know the exact time of midnight. Right? Remember again, when he seeks out Makas Bechoros, the death of the firstborn, the 10th and final plague, he uses the lashon of kachatzos halayla. What does kachatzos halayla mean? How would you translate it? Around midnight. So the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu says around midnight indicates to us that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know when midnight was. Remember again, the whole conversation was, well, if Moshe didn't know it, how did David know it? So remember again, what did the Gemara answer? David knew it how? How? Because of the harp. Right? Again, remember, David didn't know on his own. But what David did know was the northern wind blows exactly at Chatzos. So he placed the harp above his bed. The northern wind coming in, punkt is Chatzos. So now the Gemara says, in reality, Moshe Rabbeinu knew Chatzos. Right? Moshe Olam Haviyada. David Nami Haviyada. David also knew when Chatzos was. So if David knew when midnight was, why did he need the harp? Very simple. Las ure mishnase. Very simple. David knew when midnight was, but David HaMelech also slept. Right? So we'll say, like most of us, I know when I have to get up, but knowing when I have to get up is only part of the battle. Right? In other words, I also need something to get me up, wake me up, right? So Lamaisa, again, David knew when Chatzos was, but Lamaisa, he needed the harp to actually awaken him. So if Moshe Rabbeinu really knew when Chatzos was, then why does he use Lashon of Kachatzos? Like around midnight. So most of this is incredible. Moshe Gemara says, Makasavar Shemayitu Atzdignine Paro Vir Moshe Badaihu. Both said this is incredible. Moshe knew when Chatzos was. What was he afraid of? Who didn't know when Chatzos was? the astrologers. Now, both say this is incredible. So if Moshe Rabbeinu says that ultimately, again, Chadosh Baruch Hu will come at Chatzos, and then the next night, what happens? The astrologers are looking at their watch. So it's 12:05. God, right? That God of the Hebrews is not here. Moshe Rabbeinu is a liar. God is false. All this kind of stuff. So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want the people to think he was mistaken. I will say there's an incredible lesson in just the way we operate. I will say, most of us walk around life with a certain construct of what we believe reality is. And when something happens that doesn't fit into that construct, what do we say? That's wrong. That's wrong. A person in life has to humble themselves to realize that sometimes that's not wrong. I'm wrong. I'm wrong. Sometimes the constructs, the realities we create for ourselves, even the truths we create for ourselves, are often incorrect. Not often, are sometimes incorrect. So the arrogance of this astrologers of Pharaoh is, Moshe Rabbeinu knew that when they looked at their watch, they assumed 12 o'clock was the absolute 12 o'clock. Right? There was no maybe our watch is off, and perhaps the God of the universe maybe has a better timekeeper than us. No. I know. And if I know it to be correct, then it's absolutely, we'll say, it sounds funny and it sounds like ridiculously arrogant, but the truth is, we often do a lot of this also. We just assume that we know what is correct, we know what is objective truth, and when something challenges that, that must be wrong. Sometimes it's good just to kind of do a little bit of an intake and just to recognize, am I calibrated in the right way? Or perhaps I'm off. Perhaps my timing, so to speak, is off. And what I'm being presented with is absolutely true. The Gemara says, incredible. I'll say from Moshe Rabbeinu, said kachatzos. That way, if you say around midnight there for what? No one's going to get braggis. No one's going to call him a liar. No one's going to call Kadosh Baruch Hu. So watch this. The Gemara says, Damar Mar, this is incredible. Lamad l'shon chalomar ini yodea. Teach your tongue to say you don't know. Shema tisbada v'tochas. Because sometimes, again, if you just make stuff up, you often could get caught in lies. Now, said the Chassam Sofer comments on this. He says, why doesn't it just say, lomar l'shoncha lomar? What do you mean, lamad l'shoncha? Teach your tongue. The Chassam Sofer says something amazing. He says, it is the most unnatural thing for a person to say, I don't know. Why? Because if you say, I don't know, what is that? What is that? So first of all, again, I will say it's a vulnerability. I'm not all-knowing. I know it's shocking, right? I'm not all-knowing. I don't have all the answers. To be able to admit that requires a degree of vulnerability, and perhaps more importantly, requires a degree of humility. So Chassam Sofer says that's difficult for most of us. Now, you should just know it comes from a good place. How so? We are made b'tzelem Elokim. We are made in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Ribono Shel Olam is all-knowing. Is all-knowing. So there's a piece of me that likes to think I am all-knowing as well. It's human nature to think we're all-knowing. So therefore, the Chassam Sofer, the Gemara says, Lama, you have to teach your tongue. It's not natural. The words I don't know don't really roll off the tongue easily. It's a little bit difficult for many of us to say it, to admit that we're not all-knowing. Something you have to teach your tongue to be able to say this. Incredible. Rav Ashi Amar, both say, first white line, Rav Ashi says, Bepalgo orta tleisar nagi arbeisar havakai, vachikar Moshe Yisrael, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kechatzos halayla ki ha'idna, ani yotzi b'zal Mitzrayim. Now, in fact, again, Rav Ashi was something different. Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to them on the night of the 14th, the end of the day of the 13th into the night of the 14th. And he was telling them, Kachatzos, this same time, tomorrow night, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to come through Egypt with the death of the firstborn. So, see, up until this whole time, we are translating Kachatzos as around midnight. Rav Ashi says, no, Kachatzos means like this midnight. Just like we're standing here tonight, midnight, same time tomorrow night, Makas Bachoros, death of the firstborn. Incredible. Let's go weiter. The David Shomer Nafshi, Ki Chosid Ani. Shabbos say, Gemara over here quotes the Pasuk in Tehillim. Right, so the Pasuk in Tehillim says as follows. The David Shomer Nafshi. So again, this is Kapitel Pevav 86. So the Gemara says as follows: The David Shomer Nafshi ki Chosid Ani. David, a song to David. Shomer Nafshi, Hashem, watch my soul because I am pious. So the Gemara says, Levi Rabbi Yitzchak Chad Amar Kach Amar David Nechadish Baruch Hu. Shabbos say, what is David saying in this phrase? This is what David was saying to Chadash Baruch Hu. Ribono Shel Olam, Lo Chosid Ani, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, am I not pious? Am I not pious? After all, Shekol Malchim Mizrach U'Ma'arav Yishenim Ad Shalosh Shos. Normally royalty gets to sleep late. Royalty sleeps until 3 hours after sunrise. Royalty and teenagers, right? Royalty and teenagers, right? Sleep until 3 hours after sunrise, right? And me, vani chatzos alayla akum l'hodos lecha. But me, I go ahead. I wake up early. So David HaMelech says, as a royal, I can take advantage. I can sleep late. I can be pampered. But me, I'm already up by chatzos, ultimately to daven to you. V'idach, the other opinion says, no. No, David wasn't proclaiming his piety. Just the opposite. He was saying, Ribono shel olam, lo chasidani. The other opinion says, this is what David HaMelech was saying before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lo chasirani, shekol malchei mizrach u'mayrav yoshem agudos bechvodam. Normally I will say, what do royals do? They associate with other royals, right? Who in turn associate with other royals, who attend functions with royals, and congregate with royals, and eat with royals, and go ahead and spend their time associating in high society. Vani, and for me, Yadai meluchlachos bedam ubeshafer v'shilya kedei latar isha labayla. David HaMelech says, I spend my days literally again with dealing with matters of family purity. The halachos of nida. Literally again, my hands are dirty with the halachos of nida. And I will say, the Maharsha points out, this is not to be understood literally per se, but meant to represent the idea that as king, David HaMelech would have had the right to remove himself from, let's say, the day-to-day issues of people. The point that he was making is, even though I am the king, I'm actively involved in the day-to-day issues of people. I will say, it's an interesting thing, right? You see this even contemporarily, right? When people are looking for a leader, right? What do they want to see in leadership? And you see, I think it's much more acute even like now. What do people want to see in a leader? I think even like in our own country, what do people want to see in a leader? Like, economy. I want at the end of the day, like, I want you to understand that I'm struggling. So I just want to know that you're going to address my struggle, right? I care, just a general person cares much less with what is happening outside of their purview, but cares what's happening in their day-to-day life. So sometimes it's easy for a leader to become so involved in the bigger things that he's not involved in the day-to-day. And David HaMelech is saying I'm involved in the day-to-day. Kings normally absent themselves from the day-to-day goings-on of the kingdom. Me, David HaMelech says, I'm actively involved in it. Furthermore, David HaMelech says, I never make a move without consulting my Rebbe. David HaMelech's Rebbe was named Mepiboshes. Now, we'll discuss that was more a descriptive name than his actual name. V'omer lo Mepiboshes Rabbi, Yafet Danti, Yafet Chiyafti, Yafet Zakisi, Yafet Taharti, Yafet Temesi, V'lo Boshti. So this is incredible. David HaMelech says, even though I am the king, and David HaMelech was a Talmud Chacham in his own right, but he was humble enough to say, whenever I issue a halachic ruling, I always run it by my Rebbe. And I'm not embarrassed to do so. Let's say it's incredible. This is David HaMelech. David HaMelech, right? The father of dynastic monarchy, the father of the messianic line. And what he's teaching us is, number one, let's say no one is too important or no one is too busy to be involved in the day-to-day issues of Klal Yisrael and the day-to-day issues of people. And number two, everyone needs someone they look to for guidance, right? We all need it in life. Because especially as we get older, we recognize that we actually have so few answers to life's major issues that you need someone who's like your guiding light to be able to look to help you. So the Rambam says, I'm the king. Everybody looks to me. And the Rambam says, who do I look to? I look to my Rebbe. I look to my Bosh. It's such a beautiful game. I'm Rabbi Shmuel Rav Idi. Mikra. I will say, is this not Gan Eden? Right? It's what is it? 9:20 at night. We're learning Maseches Berachos. David HaMelech. The world is quieting down a little bit. There's lemon seltzer, right? And alkaline water, right? It doesn't, mamish, like, just olam haba. So Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Rav Idi. Mikra. What's the meaning of the pasuk? I literally again will speak your statutes opposite the kings, and I will not be embarrassed. So the Gemara says, Tana, lo mipi bosheshmo. David HaMelech's Rebbe's name was not Mepiboshes, Ella Ishboshes Shmo. His name was Ishboshes. Velama Nikra Shmo Mepiboshes. So why did they call him Mepiboshes? Shai mevayish pnei David b'halacha. Because he used to embarrass David with halacha. In other words, he would show David that David didn't know as much as he thought he knew. Right? In other words, the Rebbe would show his Talmud, okay, you're doing wonderfully, but there's a lot you don't know. And yet, Rabbi say, what happened? And David HaMelech took it. He took it. See, Rabbi say, most of us, when someone tries to tell us we don't know something, generally we dig in our heels, even if we actually don't know what we're talking about, and try to pretend like we know what we're talking about. But the greatness of David HaMelech was that, okay, I don't know. And he humbled himself in front of his Rebbe to be able to learn. It's incredible. Therefore, again, David HaMelech has a son. David HaMelech's son, ultimately, again, really Kilav is the way it's vocalized, right? Kilav was his son. Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Kilav Shmo, his name wasn't Kilav, Ella Daniel Shmo. So David HaMelech has, listen to this, in the schus of the fact that David HaMelech humbled himself before his Rebbe, David has a son Kilav. His name wasn't really Kilav. His name was Daniel. V'lama nikra Shmo Kilav, she'machlim pnei mipiboshes ba'alacha. Wow. So Rabbi say, in the schos of the fact that David HaMelech humbled himself before his Rebbe and recognized, literally again, he was, so to speak, embarrassed. If it doesn't literally mean embarrassed, but it means that he followed his Rebbe's guidance because he recognized that his Rebbe possessed much more knowledge than he did. In that schos, David HaMelech was given a son who eclipsed the greatness of David's Rebbe. So David's son, Daniel, who was called Kilav ultimately, again, a reference to Machlim, he embarrassed Mepiboshes. Again, to be clear, not literally embarrassed. But it means is David HaMelech had a son whose knowledge eclipsed his own Rebbe. How did he have a son like that, Abbas? How did he have a son like that? Because he was humble in front of his Rebbe. Now, Abbas, I want to point out over here, it's not esoteric. It's very straightforward. If a child grows up in a home with a father who is humble, and a child sees a father who is always willing to learn from others, who recognizes that he doesn't have all of the answers, who has a Rebbe, someone who he looks to for guidance, that's the chinuch the son gets. And if the son gets that chinuch, gets that education from a young age, the son will also be humble. The son will also be open to knowledge. The son will also have a Rebbe who will humble himself before, and the son ultimately will become the great repository for that knowledge. So Daniel grew up in a home where he saw his father, the king of Israel, humble himself before his Rebbe Mepiboshes. So this boy from a young age assumed that same midah, absorbed all of this knowledge, and ultimately became even greater than David's Rebbe. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Va'alav Amar Shalom b'chachmaso." Bini, im chacham libecha yismach libi gam ani va'omer chacham bini v'samach libi v'ashiva charfi davar. Good. V'David meikal nafshei chassid. Now, one thing I will say, did David Melech call himself a chassid? He called himself pious. I think Gemara says v'haksiv lule ha'amanti l'ros b'tuv Hashem be'eretz chayim. David HaMelech says, if only I believed that I would see the good of Hashem in the land of the living. So Rabbi say, V'tana, Mishmei Rabbi Yossi, lama nakod al lule, why are there dots on top of lule? Amar David l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bon shal muftach ani b'cha, shata m'shayim sachar tol tzadikim v'asad lavo. I believe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that you are going to give good. You're going to bestow good upon the tzadikim in the future, right? In l'asad lavo. L'asad lavo can either mean in the world to come, right? Or after we die, or ultimately again in Mashiach, aval ini yodea im yesh li chelek beinehem. But I just don't know if I'm righteous. So the Gemara is bothered because beforehand we said that David HaMelech said that he was a chassid, he was pious. But did David HaMelech really look at himself as someone who's pious? After all, again, here you see David HaMelech being plagued with self-doubt. I know that you'll reward the righteous in the future. I just don't know if I am righteous. Why? Shema yigra machet. I will say, what was David HaMelech perpetually worried about? He was worried about that maybe he will sin. See, Rabbi say, David HaMelech understood that a person could have an exalted level of piety. I will say, all it takes in life is one wrong step to lose your entire spiritual footing. Right? I think many of us have had situations like that, where I build myself up, I'm happy with where I am, and then what happens? Just like I take my eyes off the spiritual road for one moment. I make one wrong turn, one wrong step, one poor decision, and literally I feel like the entire spiritual edifice that I have built has all come crumbling down. As that's what we call Shema Yigra Macheta. David HaMelech lived with this perpetual anxiety that as much as I'm trying to do the right thing, and in this moment now, perhaps I'm happy with who I am, I'm so scared that over time I'm going to lose my footing, ultimately again because of a mistake. All right, you know what we'll do? We'll stop over here for tonight. I don't want to keep it any longer. We'll stop over tonight. Again, this concept of being scared about taking a wrong step in life. We'll pick up with that sugya tomorrow. Incredible.